So, you think you know what corruption looks like, you see the stories on the news, a politician here, a shady deal there, and you think, okay, that's bad. But what if I told you that what you see is just the tip of the iceberg? What if I told you that behind the scenes, there's a whole other level of rot, a network of deals so brazen, so vast, it's almost unbelievable. We're talking about billions, not millions, billions of rands siphoned from the very systems meant to support the people of South Africa. This isn't just about greedy individuals, it's about a systematic dismantling of trust and integrity, orchestrated by some of the country's most powerful business figures. Today, we're pulling back the curtain. We're diving deep into the stories of the men who allegedly treated the nation's coffers like their personal piggy bank. These aren't just whispers or rumors, these are some of the most notorious, well-documented cases of corruption to ever hit the headlines in South Africa. We're going to connect the dots, follow the money, and expose the intricate webs of influence that allowed these schemes to flourish. You won't believe how deep the corruption goes. From retail giants to state-owned enterprises, the scale of these operations will genuinely shock you. Prepare yourselves, because this is more than just a list. This is an exposé of how a select few allegedly manipulated an entire country for personal gain. We'll look at the evidence, the scandals, and the devastating impact their actions had on millions of ordinary South Africans. This is the story of the deals made in the dark, the price of which is still being paid in the light of day. So grab a seat, because class is in session, and the subject is the anatomy of a grand-scale heist. Let's start with a name that sends shivers down the spine of any investor in South Africa, Marcus Jooste. Now this guy wasn't your typical shady character lurking in the shadows. No, he was the charismatic, high-flying CEO of Steinhoff International, a global retail giant. He was the face of South African business success, a titan of industry. People trusted him. They invested their life savings, their pensions, their children's university funds into his company. Steinhoff was a darling of the Johannesburg Stock Exchange, a behemoth that seemed too big, too successful to ever fail. Imagine putting all your faith, all your financial security, into a company that seemed as solid as Table Mountain. That's what millions did. Jooste was a master of illusion, projecting an image of unstoppable growth and prosperity. He would stand before shareholders and analysts, painting a picture of a company conquering the world, one furniture store at a time. He was charming, convincing, and everyone bought it, hook, line, and sinker. The company's share price soared, making early investors feel like lottery winners. It was the South African dream personified. But behind the slick presentations and record-breaking profits was a lie. A massive, colossal lie. In December 2017, the house of cards came crashing down in the most spectacular fashion imaginable. Jooste abruptly resigned and the company admitted to accounting irregularities. That's the corporate world's polite way of saying, oops, we might have just made up our numbers for years. The truth was a multi-billion euro hole in the company's accounts, a fraud so audacious it's now called South Africa's Enron. The aftermath was pure carnage. The Steinhoff share price plummeted by over 90% in a matter of days. Think about that, 90%. It was a financial bloodbath. Billions of rands in value were wiped out. Pension funds were decimated. Ordinary people, teachers, nurses, factory workers, who had their retirement savings invested in what they thought was a blue-chip stock, saw their futures evaporate overnight. It was a betrayal of trust on a scale that was, until then, unimaginable in the country. And Marcus Jooste? While investigations dragged on for years, he was initially seen living a life of luxury, a stark and painful contrast to the financial ruin he left in his wake. The Steinhoff scandal wasn't just about numbers on a spreadsheet, it was a deep wound in the nation's psyche. It showed how one man's alleged greed could devastate the lives of millions, shattering the illusion of corporate integrity, and leaving a legacy of financial and emotional devastation that continues to this day. Now, if Marcus Jooste was the master of corporate illusion, Gavin Watson was the alleged master of greasing the political machine. His company, Bosasa, which later rebranded to African Global Operations in a classic nothing-to-see-here move, was at the very heart of the state capture inquiry. You see, Bosasa didn't sell furniture. It sold services to the government. We're talking catering, security, fencing for prisons, airports, and other state facilities. On the surface, it's a legitimate, if not slightly dull business. But the Zondo Commission pulled back the curtain, and what it revealed was less of a business and more of a corruption factory. Witnesses, including former Bosasa executive Angelo Agrizzi, painted a picture that was straight out of a gangster movie. They described how cash was allegedly stuffed into gray security bags and hand-delivered to politicians and government officials. It wasn't subtle. We're talking about cold, hard cash, allegedly dished out to ensure that Bosasa kept winning those lucrative government contracts year after year. The allegations were stunning in their brazenness. It was described as a system. If you were an official who could influence a tender, there was allegedly a monthly retainer for you. It was like a subscription service for corruption. The testimony claimed that Bosasa spent millions of rands every month just on bribes. They even had a vault, a walk-in safe, filled with cash ready for distribution. This wasn't just about winning one or two contracts, it was about capturing entire government departments, ensuring a steady flow of taxpayer money into the company's coffers. The influence allegedly reached the highest levels of power. Names of cabinet ministers, high-ranking officials, and even the ruling party itself were implicated in this web of patronage. Bosasa was accused of paying for home security systems, luxury cars, and even lavish parties for the politically connected. In return, they got tenders worth billions. It was a quid pro quo system on an industrial scale, all funded by the South African taxpayer who just wanted the prisons to be secure and the airports to be safe. Gavin Watson, the patriarch of this empire, maintained his innocence, but died in a mysterious car crash in 2019 before he could testify at the commission, leaving a trail of unanswered questions. But the legacy of Bosasa is clear. It became a symbol of how private business could allegedly infiltrate and corrupt the state from the inside out, turning public service into a marketplace where loyalty and contracts were for sale to the highest bidder. You cannot talk about corruption in South Africa without saying the name Gupta. It's not just a name, it's a verb, a noun, an adjective for a whole era of alleged state plunder. The three brothers, Ajay, Atul, and Rajesh, arrived in South Africa from India in the 1990s and, over 2 decades, built a sprawling business empire that spanned mining, media, and technology. But their most valuable asset wasn't a mine or a TV station. It was their incredibly close relationship with the then-president, Jacob Zuma. This relationship, this proximity to power, was the key that allegedly unlocked the national treasury. The term state capture was practically coined to describe the Gupta's modus operandi. They weren't just bribing officials for contracts, they were accused of influencing the appointment of cabinet ministers. Think about that. A private family allegedly having the power to decide who runs a country's key government departments like finance and public enterprises. It was like letting the foxes design the henhouse, hire the guards, and hold the keys. The stories that emerged were breathtaking. There were allegations of ministers being summoned to the Gupta's lavish Saxonwold compound in Johannesburg for interviews, where they were offered positions in exchange for making business decisions favorable to the family's interests. State-owned enterprises, the huge companies that run things like electricity and transport, were allegedly bled dry. Tenders worth billions were directed to Gupta-linked companies, often for work that was overpriced or never even done. They even had their own media outlets, the New Age newspaper, and the AN7 television channel, which were allegedly propped up by massive government advertising deals and used as a propaganda arm to attack their critics and defend their political allies. It was a fully integrated system of influence, extraction, and information control. They didn't just want to steal the money, they wanted to control the narrative while they were doing it, convincing the public that everything was fine, that they were the victims of a racist conspiracy. The Guptas fled South Africa as the net began to close, becoming international fugitives. Their story is a cautionary tale of how unchecked political influence can be weaponized by private interests. It demonstrates how an entire state apparatus can be bent to serve the needs of a single family, leaving a trail of hollowed-out institutions, a crippled economy, and a deeply wounded public trust that will take generations to rebuild. When your father is the president of the country and your business partners are the Gupta brothers, you're going to attract some attention. And Duduzane Zuma, son of former President Jacob Zuma, has been at the center of a storm of controversy for years. He wasn't just a bystander in the Gupta saga. He was a key player, a director in numerous Gupta-owned companies, and the visible link that connected the highest office in the land to the family, at the heart of state capture allegations. His journey from a young, unknown graduate to a multimillionaire businessman was astonishingly rapid, and it coincided perfectly with his father's presidency and his partnership with the Guptas. He held directorships in at least 11 Gupta-linked companies, including the controversial mining firm Tegeta Exploration and Resources, and the media company Infinity Media. This wasn't a ceremonial role. He was deep inside the business empire that was winning massive and often questionable deals from the state. One of the most damning pieces of evidence came from former Deputy Finance Minister Maccabisi Jonas. Jonas testified under oath that Duduzane Zuma was present at a meeting at the Gupta compound where he, Jonas, was offered the position of finance minister and a staggering 600 million rand bribe if he would work with the family. Duduzane's alleged role was that of the facilitator, the one who set up the meeting, the bridge between political power and private interests. He has denied the allegations, but the testimony painted a picture of him as an active participant in the state capture project. His name also popped up in connection with the controversial acquisition of the Optimum coal mine. The Gupta-owned Tegeta, with Duduzane as a director, acquired the mine after the previous owners Glencore were allegedly strong-armed by Eskom, the state power utility. Suddenly, Eskom, which had refused to renegotiate a coal contract with Glencore, signed a lucrative new deal with Tegeta, and even gave them a massive prepayment, which conveniently helped them fund the purchase of the mine. It looked less like a business deal and more like a coordinated shakedown. Duduzane Zuma has consistently argued that he is a legitimate businessman who is being unfairly targeted because of his father's name. He presents himself as a victim of political battles. But for his critics, his rapid accumulation of wealth and his direct involvement in companies at the epicenter of state capture allegations make him a symbol of the nepotism and cronyism that defined that era. His story is a tangled web of family ties, political power, and immense wealth, leaving South Africans to wonder where business ended and political influence began. Brian Molefe was once celebrated as a super CEO, a turnaround specialist parachuted into struggling state-owned enterprises to fix them. When he took the helm of Eskom, the nation's beleaguered power utility, in 2015, there was a collective sigh of relief. He talked tough. He seemed to know what he was doing, and for a brief period the lights stayed on. He was hailed as a hero, the man who saved South Africa from endless load shedding. But that heroic image soon began to crumble under the weight of state capture allegations. The Public Protector's State of Capture report revealed a very different side to Brian Molefe. It detailed an astonishingly cozy relationship between the Eskom CEO and the Gupta family. Phone records showed Molefe had called Ajay Gupta 44 times and had been placed in the Saxonwold area near the Gupta compound 19 times in just a few months. This wasn't just a casual acquaintance, it was constant communication. When confronted with this evidence, Molefe gave an explanation that would become infamous. He claimed he was in the area because he was visiting a shebeen, a local tavern. The Saxonwold shebeen became a national joke, a symbol of a transparently weak excuse for an inexplicably close relationship. It was a moment that shattered his credibility and turned him from a corporate hero into a meme, a punchline in the tragic comedy of state capture. But the allegations were no laughing matter. Under Molefe's leadership, Eskom made a series of decisions that massively benefited the Guptas. The most notorious was the multi-million rand prepayment to Tegeta, the Gupta-owned company, which helped them buy the Optimum coal mine. Eskom, a public entity, essentially bankrolled a private acquisition for the president's friends. It was also accused of squeezing other coal suppliers to make way for Gupta contracts. The institution was allegedly being run not for the benefit of the country, but for the benefit of one family. After the report was released, Molefe resigned in tears, claiming he was leaving in the interest of good governance. But then, in a move that defied all logic, the Eskom board tried to reinstate him a few months later with a massive pension payout. The public outcry was deafening, and the plan was eventually scrapped. Brian Molefe's story is a dramatic fall from grace, a tale of how a celebrated leader became entangled in a web of corruption, ultimately leaving the nation's power utility in a worse state than he found it, both financially and reputationally. The South African Revenue Service, or SARS, was once the pride of the nation. It was one of the most efficient, respected, and feared government institutions in the world. It was a well-oiled machine that collected the money needed to build roads, schools, and hospitals. It was the one part of the state that truly worked. And then, Tom Moyan was appointed as its commissioner in 2014. Almost immediately, things began to go wrong. Moyan, a man with no previous tax experience but strong political connections, began a radical restructuring of SARS. He dismantled key, highly effective units, including the High-Risk Investigations Unit, which was famous for tackling complex tax evasion and organized crime. Experienced, skilled, and long-serving executives were pushed out, purged, or sidelined, replaced by individuals loyal to Moyan. The institutional knowledge and expertise that had taken 2 decades to build were systematically destroyed. A narrative was created about a rogue unit operating illegally within SARS, a story that was used to justify the purge of top officials. This narrative has since been widely discredited, but at the time it did immense damage. It created a climate of fear and paranoia within the institution. The best and brightest left in droves, and the tax agency's ability to collect revenue plummeted. For the first time in its democratic history, SARS began missing its collection targets by billions of rands. Why would anyone do this? The Nugent Commission of Inquiry, set up to investigate the mess at SARS, concluded that Moyan's tenure was a calamity. The commission found that his actions were not just mismanagement but a deliberate effort to seize control of the revenue service. It was alleged that this was part of the broader state capture project, weaken the state's ability to investigate the tax affairs of the powerful and politically connected, including those linked to the Gupta family and even the former president himself. The consequences were devastating for South Africa. The revenue shortfall meant less money for essential public services. The country had to borrow more, increasing its national debt. The damage to SARS wasn't just financial, it was a deep blow to state capacity. Tom Moyan's legacy is one of institutional destruction. He took one of the country's crown jewels, and according to the findings of a judicial commission, systematically broke it for political purposes, leaving ordinary citizens to pay the price. Dr. Iqbal Survey is a man who honestly loves the spotlight. He styles himself as a brilliant entrepreneur, a philanthropist, and a champion of transformation in the South African media landscape. He heads the Sekunjalo Independent Media Group, which is, one of the largest newspaper publishers in the country. But behind this self-proclaimed success story is a trail of controversy, questionable business deals, and, some pretty serious allegations involving public pension funds. The biggest cloud hanging over Survey's head relates to the Public Investment Corporation, or PIC. Now, the PIC is the entity that manages over 2 trillion rand in pension funds for South Africa's government employees. It's basically the nest egg for teachers, nurses, and police officers. A judicial inquiry known as the Unpaid Commission was set up to investigate allegations of impropriety at the PIC, and Survey's companies featured pretty prominently. The commission heard how the PIC had invested billions of rands into Survey's various companies, often against the advice of its own investment teams. One of the most scrutinized deals was the PIC's funding of Survey's consortium to buy Independent News and Media South Africa. The PIC plowed in over R1 billion. Later, it invested even more money into another of his companies, AYO Technology Solutions, just before it listed on the stock exchange. The valuation of AYO was described by critics as staggeringly high and indefensible. Shortly after the PIC invested, the share price collapsed, wiping out billions in value for the government pensioners whose money had been used. The Unpaid Commission made damning findings, concluding that the PIC had been recklessly managed and that its relationship with Survey's companies was highly improper. It found that Survey had derived improper personal benefit from his relationship with the former PIC head, Dan Magila. The commission recommended that law enforcement agencies investigate the deals to recover the lost funds. It was, frankly, a stunning rebuke of his business practices. Survey has consistently and vehemently denied all wrongdoing. He claims he is the victim of a political conspiracy and a racist media establishment that wants to see him fail. He uses his newspapers to launch blistering attacks on his critics, accusing them of trying to undermine black business success. But for many, the story of Iqbal Survey is a troubling example of how public pension funds were allegedly used to prop up a private empire, raising profound questions about corporate governance, media ownership, and, ultimately, the custodianship of the life savings of millions of public servants. Robert Gumede is, honestly, the quintessential rags to riches story. Here's a man who started with nothing and built a billion-rand empire, mainly through his IT company, Jijima. He's charismatic, flamboyant, and, well, incredibly well-connected politically. Gumede is often held up as an icon of black economic empowerment, a symbol of what's possible in the new South Africa. But you know, his career has been dogged by these persistent allegations of winning massive government contracts or tenders through his powerful political ties rather than fair competition. In South Africa, the term tenderpreneur gets thrown around a lot. It's used to describe people who get rich not by innovation or creating real value, but by securing lucrative government tenders. Sometimes, let's be honest, through questionable means. Gumede's critics have often put him in that category. His name has come up in numerous controversial deals over the years where his companies won contracts worth hundreds of millions, sometimes even billions, of rands. And pretty often these were followed by disputes, legal battles, and accusations of irregularities from rival bidders. One of the most famous and damaging controversies was the massive IT contract with the Department of Home Affairs, known as the Who Am I Online project. Jijima was awarded the tender worth over 2 billion rand to modernize the department's systems. But the project was plagued by problems, delays, and huge cost overruns. The department eventually canceled the contract, which led to a bitter and very public legal fight. That whole saga left a stain on Jijima's reputation and raised serious questions about its ability to deliver on such a big project. Then there was another major scandal, this time over a contract with the South African Police Service for forensic light sources. A company linked to Gumede won a tender that was allegedly inflated by millions of rands. The Special Investigating Unit even got involved, and the fallout was massive, really highlighting a procurement process that critics said was just wide open to manipulation by the politically connected. Now, to be fair, Robert Gumede has always fiercely defended his integrity. He says his success is all about hard work and business smarts, and he dismisses the allegations as just sour grapes from his competitors. He's never actually been convicted of any crime related to these tenders. But honestly, the recurring pattern of controversial high-value government contracts followed by public outcry and investigation has created a cloud of suspicion that's pretty hard to shake. His story, in many ways, really embodies the complex and often murky intersection of business, politics, and state procurement in South Africa. The name Zuma comes up again here, this time with the former president's nephew, Kulubuse Zuma. His story isn't really about sophisticated corporate fraud. It's a much more brutal tale of a mining enterprise that just collapsed, leaving environmental disaster and hundreds of desperate, unpaid workers behind. Kulubuse Zuma was the chairman of Aurora Empowerment Systems, a company that took over the management of 2 gold mines in Gauteng and Mpumalanga after the previous owner went into liquidation. At first, there was hope. The takeover promised to save thousands of jobs and keep the mines running, but that hope quickly turned into a nightmare. Under Aurora's management, the mines were systematically stripped of their assets. Infrastructure was dismantled and sold off as scrap. Gold production pretty much ground to a halt. And, most tragically, the thousands of miners who worked there just stopped getting paid. For months, these workers and their families were left destitute. No salaries, no food, no hope. The situation became a real humanitarian crisis. Workers were seen scavenging for food, their children starving. The mines, once productive, were flooded and destroyed, creating a massive environmental hazard with untreated acid mine water polluting local water sources. Meanwhile, reports started coming out about Aurora's directors, including Kulubuse Zuma, living lives of luxury, seemingly indifferent to all the suffering they'd left behind. Eventually the courts stepped in. In a landmark ruling, the directors of Aurora, including Kulubuse Zuma, were held personally liable for the 1.7 billion rand in damages caused by their gross negligence and reckless management of the mines. The court found that they knew they had no money and no experience to run the mines, but went ahead anyway, leading to the devastating collapse. It was, honestly, a damning indictment of their conduct. Kulubuse Zuma's defense was that he was just a non-executive chairman, not really involved in the day-to-day running of the company. But for the suffering miners and the public, his name and his connection to the highest political office were inextricably linked to the disaster. The Aurora saga remains one of the most shameful episodes in South African mining history. It's a stark reminder of how the pursuit of wealth, protected by political connections, can lead to the complete destruction of livelihoods and entire communities. Our final chapter brings us back to the Public Investment Corporation, or PIC, the custodian of the nation's civil service pensions. And at its helm for several years was its CEO, Dr. Dan Matjila. His nickname was Dr. Dan, and he was, without a doubt, one of the most powerful financial figures in the country, controlling a river of money so vast it could really shape the entire economy. His job was supposed to be the prudent, cautious guardian of this 2 trillion rand fund. However, the Empati Commission of Inquiry painted a very different picture of his leadership. It found that, under Matjila, the PIC became a place where governance broke down, and personal relationships often mattered more than sound investment principles. Matjila was accused of running the PIC like a personal fiefdom, overriding the recommendations of his investment teams to push through deals for favored individuals and companies. He was the gatekeeper, and honestly it seemed like the gate was wide open for the well-connected. One of the most glaring examples, as we mentioned earlier, was the series of multi-billion rand investments into companies linked to Iqbal Survey. The commission found that Matjila had a symbiotic relationship with Survey and that he had acted with complete disregard for the PIC's processes to approve these deals. The result was a catastrophic loss of value for the pensioners whose money he was supposed to be protecting. But it wasn't just Survey. Other questionable deals were also highlighted, where politically connected individuals received massive funding from the PIC. Another shocking allegation was that Matjila had used PC funds to help a reported girlfriend settle her personal business debts. The commission found his conduct in this matter to be a clear breach of his duties. It was a story that seemed to sum up the whole problem. The man entrusted with the nation's savings was allegedly using that power to settle personal scores and enrich his friends, treating the fund like his own private bank. Dan Matjila resigned from the PIC in 2018 under a cloud of suspicion. He's always denied any wrongdoing, arguing that his investment decisions were made in the interest of transforming the economy. But the findings of the Empati Commission were scathing. They recommended that law enforcement investigate his conduct for potential corruption. His story is a chilling account of how the biggest piggy bank in the country was left vulnerable, its immense resources allegedly exploited by the very person appointed to guard it. So there you have it, 10 stories. 10 individuals whose names have become, well, kind of synonymous with an era of breathtaking corruption in South Africa. From the boardrooms of global corporations to the heart of state-owned enterprises, the scale of the alleged plunder is just staggering. But this isn't just about money. It's about the erosion of trust, the crippling of our economy, and the deep, lasting damage to the institutions that are supposed to serve the people. These stories really show us how a toxic mix of greed, power, and a lack of accountability can bring a nation to its knees. But the story doesn't end here. The revelations from the Zondo and Empati commissions have laid the groundwork. But honestly, the real work is just beginning. The fight for justice is long and difficult. It needs a public that is aware, engaged, and just not willing to forget. We really can't afford to become numb to these headlines or to believe that this is just the way things are. The cost of corruption is paid by every single citizen, through poor services, lost jobs, and a diminished future for our children. That's why it's more important than ever to shine a light on these issues. We have to keep asking the hard questions and hold power to account, whether it's in the public or private sector. The future of South Africa depends on our collective will to break this cycle, so please don't just watch this video and move on. Talk about it, share it, and demand action from our leaders and our justice system. Stay informed, stay vigilant, and demand accountability. And if you believe in this mission, please like this video and subscribe for more exposés.